Today, we're digging into the legend of a man from Kerala who is, to this day, one of its most fascinating and controversial figures, Kayamkulam Kochchunni. Now, his is a name that really echoes through history, but what it actually stands for? Well, that's where things get complicated. And this is the absolute heart of the puzzle, because if you ask people about Kochchunni, you're going to get two totally different stories. To some, he was just a notorious plunderer, a violent criminal, plain and simple. But to so many others, he was a hero, a champion for the poor. So the big question is, how is that even possible? How can one person be seen in two completely opposite ways? To figure that out, we have to go right back to the beginning of his story. So let's explore how a boy born into poverty becomes this legendary outlaw. We're going to trace the path that forged the man behind the myth. Okay, so picture this. Kochchunni is born into pretty miserable poverty. At just 10 years old, he leaves home to find work. And for a decade, he is the model employee at a local shop. So good, in fact, that he's eventually put in charge of the whole business. But he had a secret. At night, he was secretly mastering martial arts. And when his boss found out just how skilled and maybe how dangerous he was, he fired him. Suddenly, at 20, with a new wife and no job, Kochchunni felt like he was backed into a corner, and he turned to the one thing he had left: crime. But here's the thing. Even as a criminal, Kochchunni wasn't your typical thief. No, he lived by a very strict, personal code of honor. And these weren't just suggestions, they were ironclad rules. He had one target and only one target: the ruthless rich who were exploiting everybody else. He made it a point to never harass the needy, never harm women or children, and he gave away most of what he stole to charity. He was helping countless families get by. So yeah, he was stealing, but for a lot of people, he was stealing for all the right reasons. You know, this really puts him squarely into that classic archetype of the gentleman thief. Think Robin Hood, right? Someone who operates outside the law but is absolutely governed by their own internal and often very strict moral compass. And there's this one story that really shows you who he was. Get this, one night, Kochchunni robs a poor Christian merchant of 200 rupees, money the man desperately needed to pay off his debts. But about 2 weeks later, Kochchunni shows up at his house. Not only does he return the 200 rupees, he gives the man another 500, calling the whole thing a loan he needed for an emergency. That one act of generosity completely changed the merchant's life, and he went on to become a successful businessman. But his story is way more than just robbing from the rich to give to the poor. Kochchunni was an absolute master of his craft, but he was also a man capable of some pretty terrible things. First, let's talk about his skills, because they were seriously legendary. There was this wealthy, arrogant man, a Nair, who built a new house with double thick walls. And he went around bragging that not even the great Kochchunni could break in. He basically threw down a challenge, and Kochchunni decided to answer it. Not with force, but with pure cunning. Using some kind of illusion or magic that he'd learned, Kochchunni perfectly impersonated the Nair. He walked right up to the man's wife and tricked her into handing over a fortune in jewels for a worthless bag of pebbles. But here's the kicker. He didn't even keep them. He later returned all the jewels, telling the totally humiliated Nair he just wanted to teach him a lesson about being so arrogant. He didn't need to break the walls. He just waltzed right through the front door. And this is where the legend takes a very dark and unavoidable turn. For all his charm and all his principles, Kochchunni was also a killer. I mean, he killed his own mother-in-law, striking her down with a rod in a fit of pure rage during an argument. And later, after a lover betrayed him and got him captured, he escaped, tracked her down with her new partner, and killed them both in cold, calculated revenge. These are not the actions of a simple hero. These are the violent acts of a very dangerous man. So, how does the story of such a complicated man finally end? Well, it's not in some blaze of glory. It ends with the quiet, sharp sting of betrayal. The authorities, just fed up with being outsmarted, knew that force was never going to work. So, they came up with a new plan. They recruited a disgruntled ex-member of his gang, and this guy, in turn, conspired with the one person in the world Kochchunni would never, ever suspect: his best friend, his brother-in-arms, Kochchipua. His friend invited him over, gave him food and drinks, and then just turned him over to the police. As they were tying him up, a completely stunned Kochchunni just looked at his friend and said these words: You can just feel the shock and the heartbreak of being betrayed by the one person he trusted most. And, after 18 years as a wanted outlaw, constantly outwitting everyone, his life in prison was incredibly short. Kochchunni died just 91 days after he was captured. He was only 41 years old. The legend's run was over. But in a final, almost unbelievable twist of fate, every single person who conspired against him was eventually convicted of other crimes and sent to the very same jail. It was like his final warning came true. They all got what was coming to them. Which brings us right back to where we started. After everything, the charity, the code of honor, the incredible skill, but also the rage and the murders, what is he? Is he a hero or is he a villain? Maybe the whole point of his legend is that he was both. He was a gentleman and a plunderer, a savior and a sinner. His story shows us that real people and the legends they become are almost never just black and white. And maybe, just maybe, that complexity is exactly why we're still talking about him today.